Amazing. So excited to kick this off. The way that this is going to work is I will quickly ask the board members to introduce themselves, so all of you have a little bit more context, even though hopefully you have been paying attention when they've been here talking all day long. And then we're going to open up the floor to questions from the audience. So it's a great opportunity while they're introducing themselves to prepare any questions that you might want to ask. Starting off with Shuo.
Well, hi everyone. You hopefully met me just now in the last session. My name is Shuo. Yep. Fortunately had the honor of working with these amazing volunteers at DECODE as well as amazing board members. So I run a venture fund full time, investing in super early stage startups. And I've been on the faculty here at UC Berkeley. This is surprisingly my 14th year. So it's been a lot of fun. Teaching entrepreneurship here, so really excited to see students, former students, people I've worked with throughout my years here at Cal here. Awesome to see you guys. So yeah, really excited to take questions from you guys. And for anyone who's standing, please come sit down. I promise we don't bite. Like, these are really nice seats and we get to see you. Come sit.
Amazing. As someone who's taken a class with Shuo before, I'm not surprised at all that she's been teaching for 14 years. It's an amazing experience. But moving on to Esther, it would be great if you could introduce yourself.
So my name is Esther Wojcicki. I'm very honored and happy to be here. I graduated from Berkeley. I have 3 degrees from Berkeley because I never wanted to leave. Yes, go Bears is right. And then I'm sorry to tell you, after that, I went to the place across the bay that you don't really like too much, called Stanford. And I didn't do it on my own. My husband decided that, well, he got a position at Stanford as chair of physics, so that we're there. And I'm still there, by the way. But I do come here, so I'm very happy to be here. And so I think probably the main thing that I'm known for are my 3 daughters. You all know who my 3 daughters are? Anybody know? No one knows?
Back there.
Okay, so I have this title, Godmother of Silicon Valley. So I don't know, do I look like a godmother? I'm not sure, I should be wearing my Cal sweatshirt. Anyway, my 3 daughters are super famous. My oldest daughter, Susan, is the former CEO of YouTube, and she's the one that bought YouTube for Google. And the other famous part of it is that Google started in her garage. So that's kind of famous, right? And my second daughter is Janet, and she's a professor of pediatrics at the University of California, San Francisco Center. She focuses on the obesity epidemic, which is worldwide, and it's actually in poor countries as well. It's a very sad situation for all of us. And so she's trying to help. And my third daughter is Anne, and Anne is the co-founder, or the founder, I should say, of 23andMe, the personal genetics company. So the big question I always get from everybody is, what did you feed them for breakfast? So, yes. And I don't know why they all think that breakfast or that food is the reason that they're all so successful. But anyway, that's a very funny question. And I'm also the founder of what is called the Palo Alto High School Media Arts Program, which is today the largest media program in the nation. It's got 800 students taking journalism, 800 teenagers, all those people that you like, everybody is like, oh my God, what am I gonna do with them? They're all there, and I love them. They're very innovative, creative, and I try to encourage their creativity and not squish it. Oh yeah, so they're really pretty exciting. And so let's see, I think those are the main things. So we probably, before I take up all the time, I will switch it over here.
Esther, you are always a hard act to follow, okay? And the one thing, Esther's very humble, but she was also California Teacher of the Year. And it's important to understand that for an very long part of her career, being radical enough to believe that you should respect your students and allow them to thrive creatively, she was not necessarily appreciated for that. And it took her a long time to convince people. Now she goes all around the world telling people how to do that. So anyway, I'm the Boston-based guy on this board, and it has been just a joy. This is now my third DECODE event. I can't tell you how much I love working with each of my board members. All of them have lectured in my classes back east. And so I come here with a couple of different perspectives. I've done 8 VC-backed enterprise tech startups, took a couple public on the NASDAQ, 7 of 8 were acquired. And I was lucky enough to be tapped on the shoulder to start teaching at MIT about 22 years ago. It was not a bucket list item, of course I couldn't say no, and I fell in love with teaching. And so 22 years later, I teach at Harvard, I teach at Brown, I teach at Rutgers. I'm fortunate enough to teach just in the engineering leadership professional program here at Berkeley. And I just love the Berkeley vibe. I wish I could be out here more often. For those of you who are at Berkeley, you have nothing to apologize for at the school across the bay or the Ivies. You are an amazing community of students. The hustle culture here is like nothing I've ever seen, and every time I come here, I get an adrenaline rush, and I thank Berkeley for that.
Thank you.
Go Bears.
I got the loud mic. And I think it is also classic that Mike spent most of the time talking about someone else when he was introducing himself, so Mike is great.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
That one sounded like I was in a UFO. I'm Bill Allison. I'm Berkeley's Chief Technology Officer. Been at Berkeley a long time because I got an adrenaline rush when I came here, and it's never gone away. Most of it's good, but you get all kinds of adrenaline here. And part of the reason that I've stayed so long is earlier in my career, I worked on e-commerce. I had startups doing credit card processing and community, where we built some of the first e-commerce into community-oriented web stuff. And but moving from those early days, it was really great to come to a place like Berkeley where there was this blend of entrepreneurialism, deep technical knowledge, and you get to really like you're really making a difference. And so Shuo was like, hey, do you want to be a part of DECODE? And what DECODE is doing is really unpacking and decoding and making Silicon Valley and the tech industry understandable. Like, how do you get into it? What does it mean? And pulling these amazing speakers in. So I said, sign me up. I really want to help with this. And so that's enough for me.
Amazing. So hopefully now all of you have a little bit more context to our amazing board. I have a lot of questions prepared because I'm always dying to ask these folks questions, but I want to open it up to the audience first and give you guys the chance to ask any questions. Feel free to raise your hands and I'll bring the mic over to you. Amazing.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Kush, and I actually own a small little company here, and we sell ants online. I'm sure I talked to Ms. Shuo online on LinkedIn, but yeah, ants. So I actually wanted to ask, right now I'm at a point where it's stagnating, and I'm trying to figure out how to grow a commerce business online, or how to take an adjacent route and maybe enter a new market, like maybe education or retail or some other platforms. So in a sense from you guys, what do you think is the best way to grow in a niche market?
I have a customer for you. Yes, please see me afterward. I'm not kidding. One of my grandchildren's at Stanford, and she dissects ants. Oh, wow. And she needs a lot of them. Oh, wow. And Stanford University, this laboratory is using ants for all their research. Do you know about them? No. Oh, well, that's going to be a big market.
So the answer to your question is ask a question at a conference like this.
Okay.
So I guess to follow up on that, how would you recommend entering an educational market, like talking to schools about getting ants into their programs? Do you guys have any insights on that?
Well, getting into, first of all, schools are kind of mercurial. They're difficult to work with. I would go to the National Association of Science Teachers and talk to them about it. I mean, ants are pretty easy to deal with. They're not like some of the other things they have to dissect or whatever. And I would make sure that they knew what they could do with the ant population. And I think it's an easy, simple thing to do to help students get more involved in actual scientific research. So that's one thing I would do. And I can't think of...
So Esther's recommending the top-down approach, but you're a very personable guy. You broke the ice with the question, right? Go out and meet science teachers, right? We all have examples of teachers that have had a profound impact on our lives. So go out and find those really enthusiastic science teachers that really care about making a difference and start helping them to understand how to bring it into their classrooms and create some success stories. And then use social media and other ways to get that success story out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to give you credit for, he has already been making revenue. So it's pretty impressive for an entrepreneur in the very early days to already start scaling. So of course, anyone in the audience, if you're interested, definitely go strike up a conversation and introduce yourselves. But I think this is what we're here for as a community, right? To help entrepreneurs help each other. Thanks for raising the question.
Yeah, thanks for breaking the ice.
This is what I love about events like these. I would have never imagined that an ant selling business would get a potential customer from someone on the board. But this is really cool. Okay, what are the odds exactly? But okay, great question, Kushal. Thanks a lot for being the first question. I'm going to open it up again to the audience. If someone has questions, now's the time to speak up. Yeah, Ricardo.
Hello, I'm Ricardo Cebada, CEO and co-founder at SkillsTech. We are building hyper-personalized learning through chatbots. It's a two-side chatbot. The professor could make the character, the course, and the student could put their inputs about how they learn and have a personalized experience. My question is, what's the biggest barrier or problem to implement this kind of AI educational tools in schools and also maybe in enterprise?
And we're talking high school, elementary, high school, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I think number one barrier to changing education or to offering any kind of technology in education are the teachers. The teachers do not want to change. So what you need to do is you need to show the teachers how your product makes their life better. As soon as the teacher thinks that they're more effective, or that the kids are going to like them better, or that the parents are going to tell them how great they are, then they'll use your product. But, they're a tough bunch, as you know. So that's the main thing.
And just COVID changed a lot, right? So, I spend a lot of time with a lot of people sort of in the school systems, technologists, and what they'll tell you is, right, we all know exactly as Esther said, right? These are very unwilling to change people. But COVID forced teachers to have to deal with technology in a way they never did before. So I think there is a little bit of a mindset shift that is happening, which allows your timing maybe to be a little bit more, in line with what you want to do. Yeah. But we'll take whatever we can get.
I think show them don't talk about it as technology. So it's do what they said, but also get them excited about it, because a lot of teachers have had the enthusiasm beaten out of them by the difficulties of being in their job. And so if you can rekindle that while making their life easier, they will get excited about it and despite themselves.
I agree with everything folks have shared so far. Maybe one thing I will add is that teachers don't necessarily have the biggest budget to work with, depending on what schools you're talking about. Are we talking about private schools, public schools? Oftentimes teachers don't have budget out of pocket to purchase a new shiny object, for example. So is it school districts that you need to talk to? Is it someone specifically within that particular school that would benefit the most? So there is the top down, there's the bottoms up, but rarely is it the individual teacher that has the biggest disposable budget for you to tap into.
That's a really good point. The teachers may be the users. So I would look at a freemium model. Get the teachers excited because you need the champions in the school, and then you have a sales job on the enterprise side and a sales job on the individual side.
A follow-up question is, who is the decision maker on this type of technology purchase?
Every district has a curriculum person, and they're usually called, associate superintendent of curriculum or something like that, and they're the ones that you need to talk to. But one thing you might want to do is have a pilot of teachers that are working with you, so that when you go to this associate superintendent, you can say, well, we already found, and this is what they all really like it, and they want to do it, and so it'll open the door for you.
And not to call Arian out of all places, but he's also working with teachers. So you guys should talk. You guys are not in the exact same space, but you're selling to similar groups of audience. And we talk all the time about how it's the superintendent, it's not necessarily the teachers. Is there a way to pass on the cost to teachers and students because they derive the final benefit? Really depends on where you end up going with the final product. We've also talked about the idea of publishers, for example, being a massive organization that has disposable budget where they can provide additional funding that you might need to do something, but depends on where in the education curriculum you're integrated into. So you guys should chat.
One thing that I would derive from that great question is, of course, it's focused on the edtech industry, but it's applicable to all the startups in this room because each startup needs to find out who their stakeholders are, who their influencers, saboteurs, all of that stuff. So of course, in this case, that's teachers, the board, but that's applicable to every industry to a large extent. Amazing. Other questions? Yeah, Lean.
Hello. My name is Leonid, and this is going to be more like philosophical questions and start a practical one. Based on the audience of like 20, 25 years old, I expect, what would be one piece of advice from everyone you would give us who are pursuing their own venture? What would it be?
I think the trickiest thing is, and I think a panelist mentioned this earlier, is you have to do your own homework and you have to make your own decisions and you have to own them because everyone wants to give you advice. 80% of it's probably not right. You can't depend on the media because they're writing the current story. Everyone's great at predicting the present. So if you want to make a really successful business, you have to go very deep and narrow in a certain area and make sure you have a really good idea about what you can sell right away, but also a hypothesis about where we'll go. And you have to own it yourself, and it's really challenging because you also have to listen and ask tons of questions, but take it as data. Like I think it was Ben that said that.
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So you want advice on how anybody should think about potentially starting a new venture?
Based on your life and what you learned, what would you advise you?
Okay, so I want to go upstream of where Bill is, and you have to understand, right? There's a lot of mythology and sensationalism about startup life, right? Hollywood portrays it as something very glamorous, and let's be very clear, that is completely wrong, okay? But that doesn't mean that it's not amazing. And so it is an insane amount of work. There's a lot of personal sacrifices that you need to make. And you ride an emotional roller coaster every single day. And the only way you can sustain yourself on that emotional roller coaster is that you are so passionate about what you are doing, you can't imagine not doing it, right? Because when you hit those inevitable lows, and let me tell you, there are some very low lows, it's not a pep talk from someone from externally trying to get you up off your back. It's coming from inside you that I have to do this, right? And if you don't have that level of fire, then I would think really hard about whether this is the right thing to do. Okay? I hope that was philosophical enough for you. Okay.
So I agree with both of what you both said. I think, so I've seen a few startups. I saw Google at the very beginning, It wasn't easy. And they just were so convinced they were right that no matter what stood in their way, they pursued. And I think you have to be committed and believe in yourself that you can do it. And I also know Elon, and I met him in 2000. So, and I can tell you, it was no picnic getting Tesla off the ground. If you read his biography, or it's not a, yeah, it is a biography. Well, I saw it in action, and I can tell you, he got so many people who told him it would never work. Electric cars, it was a joke. No one's ever gonna do it. And the whole automobile industry in Detroit was 100% against it. It was a tough sell. So the companies that are going to change the world in the future are going to be headed by people that believe in themselves and believe in their ideas and are able to convince a small team, doesn't have to be a big team, that they're right. So that's what you need to do.
That's so tough to follow. So I will try to take it a level down. So after hearing Esther's advice, your question then might be, well, how do you build up that conviction? So that's a piece that I'll address. I think some of the best founders I've worked with don't start out 100% confident. If you start out that confident, it's really easy to end up like an SBF or an Elizabeth Holmes, where you're telling this story that is much bigger than what you actually have at the moment. So I think some of the best founders I've worked with tend to have started out as fractional founders in some capacity. So students who have taken my class will hear me talking about this, where a lot of those founders that I invested in the early days, or I worked with the early days, they're either full-time students or they're full-time working in a job where they're struggling personally from this problem that's really irking them every day. So it's not an arbitrary problem that you have no connection with, that you just kind of stumble into. It's something that you have some sort of personal connection to. That's where that personal passion piece that Mike talked about come from. And then you kind of start to not just solve the problem, but you start to explore the problem. Because some people think that you see a problem and you have a solution right away, but typically it takes you many years to even explore the problem. So I think some of the best founders I've seen will explore the problem, and then based on what Esther said, build up conviction to eventually believe what that final solution should look like. So when you're looking at something, the best founders I've seen will say, I have 3 assumptions that lead to this conclusion. These are the most time efficient, capital efficient, resource efficient experiments I'll design to test these assumptions. And if I can test them out to be correct, then over time I build up that conviction to really believe that. And then to what Bill initially said around designing that or tailoring that advice to yourself, I think you have to think about all this advice and taking whatever we share with a grain of salt, being biased by our experiences, what we've seen. So tailoring it to your specific circumstances. So one thing I'll mention is that a lot of the founders I work with tend to see that kind of overnight success. So for example, I know Bloomberg covered one of our portfolio companies. She was the first female founder of an AI unicorn called Imbue, how they had crossed the $1 billion valuation mark and became a unicorn, and the news was suddenly all over the place. But when you actually look at her story, it's her 7th year in the founding that she was able to raise her Series B that made her a unicorn. So in the grander scheme of things, like Series B taking 7 years to raise, that's a very long time, right? And to become a unicorn doesn't mean you're anywhere close to success. You're not necessarily doing an IPO, you're not getting acquired. And I mean, even Elon Musk, when he was building Tesla, when he was ramping up for the Model 3, he was a month away from bankruptcy. So this definition of success is very far and personal to what it means to you. So at least in terms of the tech startups that I work with, I always tell them it's a very long journey, and it's only worth your time and effort if you really care. So the stat that I always share with my students is that the average amount of time it takes from a startup, from the moment when they start to when maybe they're building fractionally to when they start to really look at some sort of exit defined by IPO or acquisition, that average time is 10 years. which is longer than the average American marriage. So it takes a very, very long time. It takes you knowing who you're gonna work with and working out this co-founder relationship to really get there, right? So I guess the advice that I would share is, if you know you wanna do something, don't be intimidated. Work on it in a fractional capacity somewhere, like even if you're a full-time student or you have a full-time job, whatever's irking you, try to tinker around with it part-time and see where that goes and see if you can build more traction. And as you prove these assumptions right and you gain more conviction, then start to lean into it more.
That is, last question. I had a couple of questions for the board, but okay, I think I will keep them to myself. I will open it back up to the audience, but one thing that I wanted to highlight that Shuo brought up, Will brought up, Esther, Mike, is that success means different things to different people. So I would love to, in some point in your answers, hear about what success means to you and how you would recommend all the student entrepreneurs here to define their own version of success. But before we jump into that, I will open back up to the audience. Yeah, go ahead. I saw your hand up first.
I have a question for William and also Mike. By the way, I'm a Rutgers graduate, so thanks for that. And I guess question for higher education tech systems. How do people innovate in that space? I used to work in New Jersey's consortium, education consortium, a long time ago. And I felt like it's just a very hard space to crack, even if people are innovating. How do people get into that front gate?
And are you talking about commercializing IP from the university or just starting up companies in general?
Entrepreneurs who are trying to innovate in educational space, but they need to integrate with university systems, let's say. And it's a very strong barrier that's what I've noticed before. So any advice for that?
All right, I'll start with the least amount of nuance. Yeah. And as Berkeley CTO, this makes my hair fall out all the time because I love innovation. Part of my role is to drive innovation, and it's incredibly hard to do it. And one of the reasons, honestly, is because, say, at a place like Berkeley, where we're in the very top public research university, we're not worried about the demographic cliff, honestly, that's going to happen, that's going to hurt a lot of higher education because we're in the top tier. And that ironically makes us less urgent around investing in innovation. So my advice to startups is don't try to integrate with all of our systems. Don't quote me here. Yeah. But
no one's filming anything, so you're good.
But what I would recommend is find real problems that you're aware of from being a student or from hearing other instructors and stuff talk about. And universities are very decentralized. So I'm talking about research universities like Berkeley. We're very decentralized and no one tells the faculty what to do. So if somebody wants to use your product, start with one graduate student who's an instructor. The professors listen to the graduate students. You're never going to get airtime with a professor, even I don't. So talk to the graduate students, they know what's going on, get them excited about it, get them to use it in their section. Iterate a few times, they'll tell their professor, then all the sections will be using it, then the professor tells another professor, and pretty soon you've got 100 professors using it. And what did I say about professors? They run this place. So when they say, hey, we need this thing, then when they come to me, I can do something about it. If you meet with me, then what am I going to do, go ask for money? The professor will say, don't give them any more money in the administration, they're just going to waste it. So the idea has to come from the professors.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Is that right? Start with the graduates, yeah. Because they're very close to the problem. They were a student recently. They're probably having to teach as part of their role. They're going to get it. And if they get it, professors will get it.
And so I will take the perspective more of a non-tenured professor. And what I would say is, within the multiple research universities that I teach in, it's more than likely it's going to be the professors of practice that have been working in industry that are going to be open-minded to bringing in solutions that are going to drive change, right? So I love working with Edtech accelerators and funds to figure out how I might bring in new capabilities to make my class more engaging, to make my class more exciting, right? So to me, whether you're working with grad students or others who are incentivized to change, But unfortunately, tenured faculty are completely in a different world, right? They're just not incentivized to change, and it's not worth even trying, right? Yeah.
I know we're running out of time, but I saw your hand since a few questions ago. Do you want to ask your last question? Yeah.
Thank you guys for your knowledge. Thank you guys for your knowledge and wisdom. As we know, the startup journey is long, and not everyone will have a successful exit. For those startups and those individuals that have challenges, what can they do with the intellectual property they have created when there's not necessarily a direct market for someone to secure that intellectual property? Any suggestions or pathways for them? Thank you.
So Wesley, give me a bit of an idea. I'm not sure 100%. Can you turn down the volume a little bit? Like you're saying, like a startup isn't getting the traction it needs, but you have invented something that you want to monetize. Is that the?
Speaking particularly for Black and brown entrepreneurs as well as women entrepreneurs, getting access to capital can be a barrier at times. So people may be doing all the right things, but not being able to get that next injection to get them over the hump. However, for them, they'll take it as a failure that they have to close up their business, but they may have this intellectual property in terms of this platform or this particular process, but they may not know what avenues they can take to be able to transfer it or to sell it or whatever the case is. So what avenues can they take to be able to, or anyone in general, what avenues can they take when they're in that position to say, oh, I'm just gonna have it sitting there doing nothing? Or is there a business development person to talk to in a corporation? I'm not sure if this was one.
So this is a great question, and there's a lot of layers of it. And I think that you hit on the thing about there's systemic inequities in how funding is appropriated and in how entrepreneurs are treated based on their background, based on the access that they've had their whole lives to various kinds of capital. And that's very hard. That's a very hard problem to overcome, but Wesley is actually one of the people who is overcoming that and has created an accelerator in Richmond, California. So you should all talk to Wesley. I'm on the board. You really got to talk to him. And I think the answer to the question is that the networks need to increase, and the access and flow of information and getting champions and allies to support you to break down some of those barriers. And if I had more answers than that, I would be saying them, but that's currently a problem that I'm really zeroed into working on. And so I'm glad to have met Wesley.
Thanks, bro. And Wesley, I've spent a lot of the panels I moderated here the last few years have been on DEI and entrepreneurship, right? And unfortunately, we've regressed back to the mean. So after the George Floyd tragedy, more and more capital formation went into Black-led and women-led funds. And 3 years later, we're kind of back to where we were again, right? We've kind of just gone back down the other side of the hill. And so this is a structural challenge, right? It's not as if there's an answer for any one founder. This is something that requires just structural change at a national level. But remember, value is in the eye of the beholder, okay? And it's one thing to walk out of a lab at Berkeley with some, deeply researched and patented technology. It's another thing to walk out with a software platform that any good coder could potentially replicate in a very, very short amount of time, right? So it's the challenge of, you put a lot of time and energy in, and you just don't get the return on that investment. But you know what you get in return, though? You get a lot of learning. That's what you get in return.
very briefly, I do think even thinking who our funders are make a big difference as well, right, in terms of enabling more equity in the ecosystem. And that includes not just VCs and investors, but also what kind of people are empowered to be angel investors. A lot of people are too scared to do angel investing because it just seems so distant and far away. So I know within DECODE, we've run fellowships for people who have 5 to 10 to 15 years of work experience, but have no exposure to venture capital whatsoever and want to learn what it's like to be an angel. So if we can empower more people to be investors and to be funders in this space, then we can perhaps support more diverse entrepreneurs as well. So that's one piece of it. And the other piece around monetizing, I think ultimately IP, at least in the context of startups, is very difficult, mainly because you can file for IP. So we invested in a startup that uses AI to file for IP and patents for companies. But the most expensive part tends not to be filing, but tends to be the enforcement piece. So you could have IP, but if it costs 10 times more money to enforce that IP, most people just give up and forget that even exists. So I think for most entrepreneurs, a key to think about here is really, how can I drive the fundamental unit economics of my business? So regardless of what I'm doing, even if I have no IP, no patent protection whatsoever, how do I think about demonstrating that I'm making more money for every unit that is sold, whether it's a product or a service, than what it costs to manufacture? And that tends to be something I encourage, so then you don't even have to be reliant on external funders. So some of the best entrepreneurs I've worked with have never raised external funding or have ever only run one round of funding ever. So actually, Ben can probably tell you this, Google only ever raised Series A. They only raised $12 million from VCs, and that was it. And then they became profitable themselves and kind of did the rest of the growth. There's other startups that I know that have done really well by just bootstrapping the whole thing. So having strong unit economics is a great way of not even having to go to investors. Yeah.
It's amazing. We have unfortunately run out of time. This panel, at least for me, has gone by so fast. I want to just thank everyone on the DECODE board, but also all of you for taking the time, for asking all these amazing questions. I know the collective wisdom on this panel is really, really high, so I'm sure there are more questions, but you can find them after this panel. And yeah, continue asking them these questions. Yeah, of course.